Hi, everyone. So a couple months ago, I was asked to present, and as I was brainstorming some good topics, I began thinking about just my career and some of the programs and initiatives I had rolled out, and began to reflect more on this past year. And as I was reflecting, I realized, wow, this has been a pretty big year of professional growth for me, and I didn't quite expect it. My theme today centers around a phrase some of you may be familiar with: you don't know what you don't know, and how critical it is to understand what that means as it relates to your own professional development. I always find it ironic that we as HR professionals spend so much time thinking about the career growth and development of the staff that we support, but oftentimes neglect our own. So for all those reasons, I thought this would be an interesting topic. Okay, so first some context. So just a snapshot of my career. Like many of you, I've spent the last many years learning and growing in the field of HR. I've worked in over 10 companies across 5 different industries, have been exposed to and responsible for just about every aspect of HR. I thought I had gained a whole lot as an HR professional. And it wasn't until this past year that I realized I had grown and flourished as an HR professional, but in my own little bubble. Let me explain. So last April, kind of a fun random picture, last April I took a position at the Museum of Science and Industry here in Chicago as the Vice President of HR. If you're not familiar with the museum, it's a wonderful institution, one of the city's premier cultural institutions, and world-renowned science center. I actually wasn't looking for a new opportunity, but rather it found me, and it became pretty self-evident in a short period of time that this was an opportunity I just couldn't pass up. A couple years ago, about 5 years ago, the museum completed a $200 million capital campaign, which, depending on what businesses you come from, might not sound like a lot of money. It's a lot of money for our institution. It allowed the museum to upgrade about 80% of the exhibit space, add a whole sort of new crop of educational programming and community outreach efforts. Really amazing work. And through that transformation, the culture and the people within it began to sort of evolve into this rich melting pot of people with varied experiences and skill sets and backgrounds, interests, and motivations. And the museum needed an HR architect, if you will, to help think about how best to evolve the existing structure and HR philosophy and framework to better support the needs of the evolving culture. I mean, I just thought that was a super cool job, really. One that I perceived had been waiting for me for all this time, and I was so excited to take that chance, both professionally and personally, being a mom of 2, with one kid in particular who I know will end up in a STEM career. So we've all been there, right? First 90 days, and I'm reflecting on the orientation program. Usually my orientations have been very much condensed, and I'm sure you've all been in that boat. It's sort of like, hurry up, get in, learn the business in 10 seconds, and then let's go. There's a lot of things to do, right? I always felt like it was a race, but this was a little bit different. My boss, who's the president of the museum, David, actually advised me to take that bit of time, take 90 days, but don't do anything. Just learn the business, ask questions, get to know people, build relationships, challenge the status quo, ask more questions, right? But don't do anything until you really understand what the culture is and what this business is about. So I felt like, wow, I've never had the luxury of time, but I will absolutely take it. So I did just that. And I spent a good couple of months just digging in and learning and listening. And over that time, it became obvious. There were things that needed to be changed. I thought these were low-hanging fruit, simple things that we could implement and change and make better. So after 90 days, I began to implement some of these changes. And I started to hit some roadblocks and some speed bumps. And not just from the business, but actually from my own team as well, from my own HR team. And I was very confused. I spent so much time learning the business and hearing people's frustrations, and I was recommending these solutions that I have implemented before. I knew they could work, but they weren't being accepted. I didn't get it. Kind of a dark slide, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with this movie. It's called Lost in Translation. I was trying to find a good, funny picture from it. It's essentially, if you're not familiar, it's a movie, and Bill Murray's character takes a job in Japan, and so he's sort of living and working in Japan and sort of realizing what a massive cultural adjustment that is. I was feeling like Bill Murray's character in this movie, right? My first reaction was, clearly, the museum must just be resistant to change. It's them, not me. I have done this sort of thing before. It's clearly not me. But I remember David's voice in the back of my head and him reminding me to be patient and to listen and to ask more questions, seek to understand. And so I kind of pumped the brakes, and I did just that. I took a step back and I asked more questions. I engaged a little bit deeper. And over time, I realized it was actually me. I didn't understand the culture and the perspectives of the people within it because I had never worked in a culture that was as tenured and diverse and complicated. I didn't know what I didn't know. Back to the theme. I'm not sure if you've seen this. I thought it was kind of a cool little visual, but in the sphere of knowledge, there's this tiny little slice of actually what you know, and then there's like a slightly larger slice of what you know you don't know, but then there's this whole rest of the pie that you don't even know you don't know. And once that became clear, and I had that realization, it sort of all began to make sense to me. Not just why some of the programs weren't working, but why I took this job and what I was gaining as an HR professional because of it. I realized that most of the talent management and people management and retention strategies, succession planning, all those programs that I had thought I'd been successful implementing were well suited, but for a very different culture. A culture defined by 20 to 30-something-year-olds, right? Highly skilled and driven, frankly less committed to the business as they were to their paychecks and their titles. A culture made up of Gen X, Y, Zers, whose average tenure was a blip in time, and who are motivated by the chance to just simply work with great, smart, creative people. The museum culture was quite different. In addition to all the Gen X, Y, and Zers, it was also made up of traditionalists and baby boomers, people whose average tenure lapsed well over double digits, right? People who were motivated by the company or the businesses, the organization's support and recognition that their service and their tenure was so valuable. Once I realized I had a lot to learn about this new culture, I started to sort of relook and rethink of some of the strategies that I thought could work. And how could we continue to evolve the existing framework without losing the elements that made it so meaningful to the people who had spent so much of their careers in building it? I found myself reflecting on people and their backgrounds, what was meaningful to them and how I could better sort of support them, and less about what HR process or theory told me XYZ programs should work. It's been a year of terrific professional growth for me, but I was laughing a little bit with some colleagues. I wondered why didn't anyone tell me that stepping out of my bubble would be a huge source of professional development for me. I remember working for people and talking with mentors and them offering all sorts of advice around certification programs, advanced degrees, trainings, conferences. No, I mean, you name it. There's so much for us to take advantage of. But what I learned this past year is that true growth comes from experience gained on the job when you're immersed in something new and different. Sort of like traveling, traveling to a new country. You sort of realize how big the world is and how small your bubble actually is. I sincerely believe that this true growth and satisfaction comes from pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, but then recognizing you're better off because of it. So, if I can be so bold as to offer any kind of advice, when I think about developing professionally and I talk to people that I've worked with before, I do offer a couple bits of snippets of advice. One, step out of your bubble. Be deliberate and plan for your next opportunity that pushes you out of your comfort zone. Value experience over titles and compensation. I know it can be tricky and hard, and there are definitely trade-offs, but I promise you that the experience you gained will far outweigh any paycheck or title that you earn. 3, don't assume what worked before will work again. I'm living proof of that. 4, remember that you don't know what you don't know, so the next time you start something new, be open, listen, understand, be open to new people's perspectives. You just may learn a thing or two. And 5, last but not least, enjoy the ride, right? It's not worth it if you don't. So I want to sort of wrap with a kind of a fun, cool employee story. I did an exit interview a couple months ago with one of our OmniMax facilitators. So if you've been to the museum or you're familiar with the OmniMax Theater, it's that big domed theater. A couple hundred people can watch very cool movies and kind of 3D way. His name is Brandon, and he had started at the museum when he was just 18 years old. In fact, he told me that when he was interviewing, the hiring manager was the last person in, and she ended with one question, and it was, "Why do you want this job?" And he looked up and he said, "Because I want to buy my mom a Christmas present." And I think he nailed the job, right, with the answer to that question. But anyways, he was 18 years old. He took this job. He ended up working at the museum for over 20 years. It's a long time. He's still young, but he ended up working there for 20 years. He sort of learned and grew professionally, personally, as the museum evolved. He had a really great run. A couple years ago, however, he had he actually was passed up for a pretty key promotion. And it was a little bit devastating to him. He had given so much to the museum, but the museum and the hiring manager decided to select a candidate for this manager position that had a more solid educational foundation. Brandon didn't have a degree. He started when he was 18, and then life took over. So, but for many reasons, one of which being the lack of educational foundation, the organization decided to select someone other than Brandon. Now, instead of him sort of taking this news and getting way down on himself, he actually used that as sort of a motivator for him to think about what he wanted to do for his next 20 years, right? And he realized that he actually wanted to become a sheriff. Someone in his family, a couple cops, someone was a sheriff at one point in time, and that's what he wanted to do. So he literally signed up for classes, he signed up for a degree, started studying on his lunch breaks, and then actually just this year was accepted into one of the police academies, which is why he was leaving the museum. He, during his exit interview with me, he was so thankful for the opportunity that the museum gave him, for taking a chance on him. He believes that it helped to keep him off the streets and really, truly gave him a chance to succeed in life. He said he grew so much from learning from his colleagues, who kind of became his surrogate family and support system over the years. Well, on his last day, right, so his last day and his last tour, he shepherds in a couple hundred people that are sitting down to watch, Flight of the Butterflies or whatever movie it was. And he explained, he does his spiel, he's probably done it a million times. The lights dim, and unbeknownst to Brandon, his manager sort of takes the mic from stage right or whatever, the other part of the stage, and announces to the whole crowd that today was Brandon's last day. And he had given 20 years to this incredible institution, and we are so much better off because of it, right? His colleagues and some of his old managers were in the crowd. It was really a really wonderful moment, to which, of course, everybody in the audience stood up, gave him a standing ovation, and Brandon was moved to tears. So it's an amazing story, and as I was reflecting on that, I realized, gosh, that would have never happened in any of the companies that I've ever worked at, mostly because many of the companies I've worked at weren't around for that long. But besides that, I don't think we would have targeted or maybe taken the risk to hire someone at 18 without any experience, and who knows what kind of future. And as I began to think about how many people's lives were changed because of Brandon's experience, I couldn't help but think about how could we hire and find more people like Brandon, right? I mean, he gave so much to so many people that he sort of worked with. Because at the end of the day, while our companies continue to strive for greater profits and revenue and whatever mission or vision, our jobs as HR professionals are to create environments and cultures that help our employees do their best work. And to remind them that life is about the people you meet and the things that you create with them. I'm not sure if anyone's seen this. It's called the Holstein Manifesto, and it's literally hanging in my office as a ginormous wall decal. But there's some great life reminders in here. I'm not sure if you can see them all, but life is simple, life is short. Live your dream and share your passion. I hope I've given you something to think about today as you plan for your career and choose your next adventure, whatever that may be. Thanks.